In this lesson, I'm trying to teach students how to apply factor by grouping to most of the polynomials that we've been learning. The first one, you just have to factor out a greatest common factor, so you can apply factor by grouping to that. We'd go over it, how to factor that without applying factor by grouping. And then the next one is a trinomial. So I teach them on the trinomials, you can just create 4 terms to go ahead and factor those out. So if you had a times c would be 1 times negative 12. And factors of 12 that make a negative 1 in the middle would be a negative 4 and a positive 3. Now some of the higher level students have already figured out that when there's a 1 in front, that is the factors. It's x minus 4 and x plus 3, and I do teach it that way. But I also show lower level students that they could apply factor by grouping if they don't understand that. So the first term is x squared. You replace the middle term with the 2 terms that you have there for trinomials if you're going to apply factor by grouping. So that's your x terms, negative 4x and positive 3x. And then you just bring down your last term. So you bring down your first and last term, you replace the middle terms on trinomials with the 2 terms that create the middle term if you're going to apply factor by grouping. And you could apply this on number 2 and number 5. And so when you factor that, that's going to be an x comes out and you're left with x minus 4. And then when you factor a 3 out, a positive 3, you're left with x minus 4 as well. So then you can factor out the common factor that they have, which is x minus 4, and the GCFs create the other factors when you distribute the x minus 4 times x and the x minus 4 times positive 3. And then difference of squares is another thing that usually is pretty simple for most students, but there were some students struggling. So you can apply factor by grouping, but if you can create 4 terms as well. So if you did the 8 times c again, 1 times negative 81 is negative 81. Factors of 81 that are going to create a 0 are going to be positive 9 and negative 9. So you'd have x squared plus 9x minus 9x creates 0x in the middle. That's what you need. And then bring down your last term. And so if you group the first and the last term, out of the first terms becomes an x, and you're left with, after pulling out that GCF, you have x plus 9. And then if you factor out, I always teach them if they have a negative in front with factor by grouping to go ahead and factor out a negative. So negative 9, and go ahead and divide by that because they get confused with the negative. So instead of multiplying, so it's going to be x plus 9. And you can see that they're going to have an x plus 9 in common that they can factor out. And they're left with the outside terms of x minus 9 when they distribute that x plus 9 back through. And so difference of squares, I do teach them the formula when I originally teach it, but some students were still struggling again. And then the new thing that I'm teaching in this lesson is the 4 terms. They have to apply factor by grouping. So the first 2 terms in number 4, the GCF that they have in common is 2x squared, and you're left with 6x plus 1. And then you have a negative that you're factoring out, so that's going to be a negative 5 that you factor out. Again, I teach them when they factor out a negative, they might want to divide. It's easier for them most of the time. And so that's going to be a positive 6x and a plus 1. Again, the 6x plus 1 is a match that factors out of both of them. And when you distribute that back through, that's going to be times 2x squared minus 5. So I do teach them that factor by grouping can be applied to most polynomials if that's an easier method, just to keep one method in mind for lower level students.